Thank you all for coming this afternoon. Some of you, I think, may have been at this same event when it was in Amsterdam, and you saw me talking there about a maiden voyage of our tool, our MindSight emotional discovery tool, which we developed and have been using for quite a while in the traditional online research channels and have recently developed and deployed in a mobile environment. And in that presentation, we talked about what was really essentially a discovery enterprise. We were understanding a little bit about how people felt when they went clothes shopping. In this particular piece of research I want to tell you about today, we have a more pointed, evaluative sort of mission. Turns out that one of the executives in my company knows a fellow who lives outside Boston who happens to have the good fortune to have actually inherited 500 Dunkin' Donuts franchises. So that said, he's fairly assiduous in trying to manage that resource, which he was, fortunate enough to inherit. And in the course of conversations, one of the things that came up is that he had the experience of having franchises that, despite tremendous similarity in terms of the background demographics and the state of the stores and so on, seemed to perform at very different levels. And so he invited us to try to help him figure out why that might be. Now, one of the things that seemed especially appropriate for us to use MindSight and to use it in a mobile format to solve this particular problem was that this is about people getting their coffee in the morning. So I don't know if you've ever done that or seen other people who are queued up to do that, but it's a kind of a unique time, and it's a state of mind which passes fairly quickly as you acquire said coffee and snack and move on into your day. But a little background on the MindSight tool is probably not a bad way to start because we're going after emotion. And there are a couple of different ways we could have thought about people's experience in this donut franchise, or for that matter, people's experience in any sort of a shopping, moment. And one is sort of the cognitive review of what went on and how did you get the job done and how did that work for you. But the other one that we think is equally or maybe even more important is try to understand, well, how did it feel? You know what I mean? Maybe you got the job done or maybe you didn't, but did you have fun? Did you have a good time? Did it feel right? And that's very much what we're hoping to help our friend understand using the MindSight tool. So what is that? For those of you who weren't around in Amsterdam, MindSight is a tool that adapts findings in neuroscience to give us a technique for directly accessing the emotional mind and getting responses from people during essentially the moment of emotional processing of stimuli. It utilizes a series of images that we have validated, which represent, in essence, a visual vocabulary of emotion. They're images whose emotional, evocative potential we have established ahead of time with large sample validation studies. And in this particular case, now that we've deployed it in a mobile format and a mobile platform, it allows us to get that kind of emotional feedback right then. And obviously, for our friend with the donut franchise, that seemed like a good way to try to figure out what was going on with his customers. So again, more background. Part of the beating heart of MindSight, and that circle was beating for a moment there as well, I guess, is findings in the field of neuroscience. I'm not myself a neuroscientist, but I like to read the stuff. It feels like it's the way the psychology is going these days, and it's a lot of very intriguing stuff. One finding of which has been replicated in a number of different ways and different times is when you show people images and you watch in very sort of millisecond terms what goes on in their brain, what you discover is there's some time spent identifying what the image is, which then is immediately followed by a period of time in which the part of the brain that is where all the activity is going on, and that's by measuring where the blood's flowing, by the way. That's what all this work essentially, they don't actually get to see quite yet neurons talking to one another. You try to see where the blood is moving to and therefore where the activity is. In any case, there's about a half a second, or a little more even, of time when purely limbic activity, the vascular heat is sort of right there in the hippocampus and the hypothalamus and the amygdala, in that space where neuroscientists have pretty much established that the emotions lie. So that's part of the secret sauce of MindSight, frankly, is to develop a task which allows people to respond to images in that emotional discovery window and thus give us responses that they haven't had time to edit, mess around with, or override in any sort of self-presentation way. The other piece of the secret sauce, as it were, I guess it's not so secret since I'm showing it to you, is a theory behind this. The theory really came first. The theory was a result of, probably 30 years. You can forget when you've had 30 of them. of answering motivational questions for clients. And that's fundamentally what we all do as market researchers. People want to know, why are customers doing this, and how might I motivate them to do some other thing that would be to my advantage? And so over that course of time, it became clear in our attempts to speak in a sort of comprehensive and clear way to our clients about motivation that there wasn't a very good system to describe what the range of motives were that operated as people came to consumer behavior, and how, so that we couldn't then say, well, here's where you might think of yourself as being in terms of how you motivate your customers, and here's how your competitor motivates the customers, and here's another way that either of you might choose to proceed that would maybe work in a totally different way. And so the motivational model that you see here, the 9 types of motivation that have names that everyone probably recognizes, like achievement and engagement and belonging, identity and mastery, are organized such that there's a structure that renders it sort of a periodic table of emotion. And I can send you a paper, I can talk to you more about that, but given that we're giving everyone another 20 minutes here, I'm not going to spend, I can talk about the theory for 20 minutes. Suffice to say, we took the theory and we validated images against the 9 different kinds of motivation that the theory stipulates. And we evaluated both positive images, so images that made folks feel secure or empowered or nurturant or masterful, and we also validated negative images that made people feel insecure or fearful and incompetent and unmasterful and so forth. And hence we acquired a library of visual images that we could use essentially as a vocabulary in a dialogue with the emotional brain back in that 600 millisecond response time that I was telling you about earlier. On to the chase. I talked a little about this in the introduction. There was a high, we had looked in particular at 2 stores. These were pretty different. There was about 1.5 times bottom line profit in what we're calling store A here. And the question was really, let's try to figure out why store A was doing better. And the owner had already exhausted all of the, is it cleanliness, is it speed from the time you make the order till you get the package delivered to you over the counter and so on. And those just didn't seem to make a difference. So we put MindSight to work. And the way that the tool works is it presents an emotional question to a respondent in the form of a dangling sentence or a sentence completion task, and it's introduced that way. And respondents in this study answered those questions, and they answered 2 kinds of sentences, one of which was, I enjoyed my visit to Dunkin' Donuts because it made me feel a little more. And then the instruction is, you're going to see these pictures when the feeling that you see, that you get from the picture you see, fills that or completes the sentence, touch it. Okay? And conversely, they went on to complete, my visit to Dunkin' Donuts was less enjoyable than it could have been because it made me feel a little bit, and then we showed the negative images. We essentially stood outside these Dunkin' Donuts stores playing this game on an iPad so that it was very sexy and interesting, and then handed people cards and said, if you want to just sit in your car and spend a couple minutes with an iPhone or with your smartphone that I see you have there and complete it, and that's how we got our data. So what did we find out? First of all, it's not totally fun getting coffee in the morning, even once you already have it in your hand. In that moment of recall about what that experience was like, we got a fair amount of negative energy from all of our respondents, irrespective of what store they went to. But it's pretty clear here that overall, and this is literally just aggregating up, okay, all the positive pictures they took, and we have a scoring system which assigns also some weighting to the speed with which they pick them. And in any case, the positive energy is, quite a lot bigger than the negative energy, and that's especially true at this high-performing store A. So what's underneath the hood on that one? Well, when you just look at the positive energy in general, what you have is in this 9-fold model that we're working with, feelings of empowerment and engagement and achievement that are essentially what we would sort of call go to work time, get lock and load, get running, and interestingly, it's of course, America runs on Dunkin'. It's maybe not a bad thing to say about your franchise if that's what you're primarily in the business of doing, is delivering that sort of get up and go, okay? But there are also other less functional benefits that played a fairly large role in the emotional takeaway of this morning, get your coffee, get your snack, and go experience. And these were much more personally emotional. They were about social contact and your feelings that you had about that, or they were ways about you felt about yourself. And they weren't just about, how did I feel about that task? Did I get it done? Did I do it fast? Did I do it well? Am I ready to go now? And interestingly, and these, by the way, actually, as we saw these, one of the things that struck us is the fact that we've done a lot of research over the years at breakfast time, and one of the things, especially qualitative research, what you find people telling you is that it's as if we're all kind of born anew in the morning, and we're kind of our own little infant, and we sort of need to be gentle to ourselves and not talk too loudly, and ideally we want to be treated nicely and have an experience that seems like we're sort of connected to the folks with whom we might be interacting. And so this stuff all felt a little like breakfast or morning time energy to us when we saw it coming up in our research. And so then we asked ourselves, what's the deal with store A versus store B? Store A and store B weren't that different in the giddy up and go stuff. You know, America can run on Dunkin' at either of these stores. Not a problem. And in fact, in one case, we have store B actually exceeding store A in the sense of achievement at the end of that visit. So that wasn't it. If there was an emotional reason why store A was doing better than store B, it wasn't in this stuff. But when we looked at how you felt about the visit, about your interaction, the emotional contact that you made, and the emotional experience that you had in terms of how you felt connected to the people who served you or how you felt about yourself as a result of the experience you had, there we saw the significant differences between store A and store B that seemed like it was starting to make for an explanation of what was going on. When we looked at the converse industry, there wasn't a lot of story, but interestingly, where we did find significant differences were in three places that sort of complement the story, because folks at store B felt more one of the crowd. They didn't feel like they were particularly being picked out as an individual. They felt not a tremendous amount of respect. They didn't feel like they were receiving a lot of esteem. They showed a lot of, they picked a lot of images which showed people being disrespected, and they felt a little incompetent. Maybe that's because they felt like they went to the wrong Dunkin' Donuts store. And all of these are significant differences. So the customers are feeling anonymous, or they're feeling a lack of respect. They ultimately feel incompetent about their choice. Because why are you going to that store where they don't really treat you very personally? And anecdotally, my folks who were out and doing this research said, in store A, they were doing those kinds of things that you might have in a store where you really love, where the person sees you at the back of the line, and they have your order ready just the way you like it when you get to the front. People were being called by name at a much higher frequency than we found in store B. And the emotional takeaway from that kind of treatment is what we're looking at here. So, what did we tell our friend with 500 franchises? Figure out ways to train your staff so you can build a solid social emotional connection, and the customer's going to feel like they made a good choice. And you're going to get loyalty, and you're going to get the kind of profits you saw in store A. Treat the customers inattentively or as numbers, as anonymous units in the line getting coffee, and make them feel, disrespected, and then they're going to feel like they made a bad choice, and you're not really going to do very well economically with your franchise. So that's the story, basically. This research, for our friend for whom we conducted, delivered a clear, actionable solution. They've been racking their brains to try and figure out what's up. I don't think in casual observation, until you paid a lot of explicit attention and gathered data about the emotional experience, it wasn't that obvious what was going on that was so different. The emotional experience clearly can dominate insofar as these other obvious factors on which our friend could evaluate his stores didn't suggest there were a tremendous lot of differences between the two stores, except for these. And mobile deployment can be key in that there was not going to be a way, that kind of mood which pervades, that made this experience so important, that made it so much more compelling for people, is, I think, a morning mood, a mood one's in during the morning coffee stop that's likely to erode. If people were randomly reached and said, gee, did you stop at a Dunkin' Donuts store for coffee today? And will you tell me about that? No, we didn't do that. We didn't actually go to, and that's obviously a follow-up piece of work to be done. But my sense is that that fragile mood, which is in the morning, was able to be accessed by the mobile deployment, which allowed us to say to them, gee, do this piece right now, please, and do it in the next 15 minutes if you would. So, what's in it for you guys out there who are not other my fellow vendors, those of you who are clients? This store, I think this engagement convinced this franchise person that success isn't always built on functional features, and that it showed him how training employees to deliver a personal touch could really make a difference. That dropped to the bottom line. I think those of you who are managing retail brands, whether that's a C-store or a quick service restaurant or a department store or other places that deliver an experience as a big piece of your product, can benefit from this kind of learning about consumers. and learning about it in the occasion of the service, because it's the kind of experience that can decay and transform itself such that you end up with, I think, dramatically impoverished data if you just randomly at some point in the future said, tell me about the last time you were at a XYZ store. CPG brands, I think, can benefit from understanding the emotional experience in their opportunity moments, whether it's on the web page or at the retail shelf or in the usage moment, all those occasions when the salience of the brand is there in real time in ways that probably can't actually be captured by instruments or surveys that come after the fact, hours or days later. And that's my story. I guess I'll stick to it today.
How are you pushing, or how did you push from, you were standing outside the store, but as you do this on an ongoing basis with clients, you obviously don't want to have the manpower standing.
This was an experiment, and this was sort of friends and family inside the tent, kind of a relate. We happen to know this fellow who had all these Dunkin' Donuts stores. But the vision of how we'll do this with clients and how we're starting to move into retail to do it is you'll recruit them to do it at the point of the cashier or whatever, and you can put it on the slip. Their surveys have been sort of solicited, I think, at this point, fairly commonly in retail kinds of experiences. Mm-hmm. And there are other ways of doing this now. I think other things you're hearing from people at this conference in terms of being able to push surveys out based on where somebody is, but more systematic ways. You don't have the notion of having somebody stand in the lot and recruit. It's a little old school, frankly, but it allowed us to get a sample together for folks here today of people who had been through this Dunkin' Donuts in a way that we frankly just didn't have the time to go back through the headquarters and get the whole thing and turn it into a full corporate sponsored study. We're still kind of growing this tree. See, and that thing that happens to when you go to that store that starts with an S, right, is in fact probably, or perhaps it's just great instincts, but that's the kind of gesture which would allow you to have that experience of personalization, which might well speak to the affective outcomes that we found here. Yeah, no, I did. And of course, for them, it allows them to say, David, and make you come fetch your, venti latte or whatever. But I think it also gives a sense that they've recognized you're not just, the guy in the blue striped shirt who's third in line. And maybe even it may have a functional benefit as well for them process-wise, but it's tremendous psychological value, I think. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Did you do any work comparing the results from the picking pictures versus more traditional methods?
No, we didn't in this case. This was really, we're driving MindSight around a lot of different blocks and seeing what the ride is like, and so this was really about introducing our friend to the MindSight technique.
Hi there.
Anyone else? Hi.
So when you were showing the pictures to the client, how long did you give them to select that picture? I saw it.
Yeah, you saw them flashing by probably on the PowerPoint slide. The fact is that slide I showed you about the emotional discovery window and that amount of time you have when you're reacting to an image that's basically purely emotional, that's how long you have. So you see an image, 850 milliseconds later, it's off, and you're seeing a new image, and then you're seeing a new image, and so it's very, very fast.
But after I looked, I want to look through all your images first before I pick one.
No. Well, that's part of the instruction is each time you see an image that gives you a feeling that seems like it will complete the sentence for you, pick it. If you feel even the slightest urge, pick it. If you
so
don't,
I could
leave it
pick
alone.
More than one? I could pick.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and there were some of those back in the day when we were first doing this. We were like, oh, you better tell them they got to pick, because that's one instinct that people have is let's wait for the one that seems perfect. It doesn't really work that way. So we had the 9-box theory, and so that was the vocabulary we wanted to acquire images to express. And so we knew that was the case. And it's great to live in Boston. There are so many graduate students who of a summer can be convened on relatively, cash-effective basis to look through images. We literally gathered, the task we set these interns was pick images for us, please, that have a really emotionally compelling sort of, that make you feel something. We didn't even tell them what, we just let them pick them. We picked about 3,000 images. And then we did a validation study in which we explained the 9 boxes to our respondents. And they're not really difficult concepts to wrap your mind around. They're things like achievement and mastery and so on. And we had people literally, we'd show them these images one at a time, the candidates, and we had them drag and drop, and we set a hurdle of 70% agreement across these, it's about 2,500 people, I think, actually. That if we had a 70% agreement, then we'd say, okay, that's an image which gives people the feeling of mastery or of nurturance or what have you. So that's how we came up with it. And at this point, we have roughly 36 positive and 36 negative images in each of the 9 boxes with which we work. In any given battery, we would typically use 6 or 7 positive in each of the 9 boxes, followed by 6 or 7 negative. Okay?
Thank you very much. Well,
All right.
we're probably out of time, so round of applause to David. Thank you.
All right, thank you.